All right, so picking up with book one of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle begins every art and every inquiry, and similarly, every action and pursuit is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. So his initial observation here is about the relative nature of the good, and that every person thinks that they are doing something good, that they're pursuing the good in some way. Not just every person, but everything that I as an individual do is also aimed at some kind of good. So the good at the outset is an incoherent concept, right? It's different in different circumstances depending on what I'm doing and for different people. There is no general agreement about the good. Uh, and more importantly, right, um, we always think that we are pursuing the good. It's not as though uh, we only pursue the good when we are doing ethics, right? Or when we're doing ethical action, right? Today, I'm going to go out and pursue the good, or I'm going to go, donate to charity or uh, to a food bank, whatever, to pursue the good. I could use a break from pursuing the bad. Right? No, obviously, everything we do is in pursuit of the good, and even the most the people who the majority, the many, believe to be bad people, evil people, even they think that they're pursuing the good. Right? The boilerplate example would be that even Hitler thinks he's pursuing the good. So, what is the nature of this good? The good is about the end. It's the end of all action. So we want to know what is the thing that is ultimately the end of all action for all people. What is it that really is this good that applies uh, to all people and all actions? Uh, and for Aristotle, the answer, as we already said in the introduction, is going to be happiness. Uh, Happiness is that at which all people aim. But of course, the question is, well, what is happiness then? Uh, what does it mean to be happy? If all of our actions are aimed at the good, but only some of them end up producing happiness, how do we know which actions are actually good and actually not? Uh, if everything is aimed at the good, the question is not what kind of action is aimed at the good, but rather what kind of action is capable of producing this highest good, happiness. So the first thing to note here is uh, the the logic, and it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but nevertheless worth mentioning. Right, uh, that the reason why happiness has to be the greatest good is because it is an end in itself. Right? And this is important language in Aristotle and in philosophy in general. Happiness is an end in itself. It is never a means to some other end. So the question of what what is happiness uh, is, well, is made a little bit more difficult by um, this means ends framework, I suppose. Right? But what Aristotle's doing by using this language, happiness is an end in itself, is to point out that uh, people do a lot of things in order to get many different kinds of things. Right? Uh, what do you want out of life? Right? Why are you taking this class? Um, well, you're probably taking the class in order to get a degree. Why do you want a degree? You might be getting the degree in order to get a job. Why do you want a job? Right, obviously to get money. Why do you want money? Right? Then the line of reasoning ends. Right? Uh, all of those things, the class, the degree, the job, and then money itself above all of those things are means to an end, means to some end. They aren't ends in themselves. You only do them in order to get something else, a means to something else. And so uh, anything that is an end in itself uh, is going to be the ultimate goal of all action, right? Because why are we doing all this stuff? We have to get to the bottom. What's the final motivation, the final goal? And the only thing that anyone can name, Aristotle says, is happiness. Right? Happiness must be it. But again, so what is this happiness? And he says there are three different kinds of lives, and thus three different basic ideas of what happiness is. This is chapter 5 in book 1. To judge from the lives that men lead, most men, and men of the most vulgar type, seem to identify the good or happiness with pleasure, which is the reason why they love the life of enjoyment. So the most, as Aristotle says, vulgar understanding of happiness is that happiness is pleasure. Uh, and we'll see this idea come back when we think about John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. Utilitarianism will, uh, with a different mode of reasoning, take up the argument that ultimately, yes, happiness is pleasure. But Aristotle has a very specific idea of pleasure. And for Aristotle, pleasure can't be the same as happiness. Pleasure is bodily pleasure. Pleasure is about uh, pleasurable sensations. Uh, Pleasure found in indulgence, right? Eating, drinking, doing drugs, having sex, you know, anything of that kind. And for most people, Aristotle says that is the end in itself, right? Or most people believe that is the ultimate end. That once you get all the money, um, all that's left is the pursuit of physical pleasure, and that's life. Then you win. That's the game over. Um, Now, for Aristotle, that's not the case, and I think it's useful to ask yourself sometimes, right? Uh, why am I not just pursuing a life of bodily pleasure? Why am I not just staying in my room, drinking beer, smoking weed, and having sex, and playing video games, and watching YouTube, and ordering pizza, eating chocolate? Right? Why do anything else? What's the point? Um, so Aristotle moves on to the next sort of group of people, and these are above the vulgar type. He says we might call them the political type. Right? And the political type believes that happiness is found in honor. It says because they believe this, roughly speaking, is the end of the political life. So either you're a you know a worker. Uh, that would have been who Aristotle had in mind by the vulgar, in the sense of regular Joe in ancient Athens. You're maybe a servant, or you are a blacksmith, something along those lines, um, and your idea is pleasure, right? But then there's the political class. In the political class, those who are landowners, those who participate in politics, those who go to the agora and debate about the laws, because right, remember, Athens is a democracy, and one of the conditions of entering into that democracy, of participating in that democracy, it wasn't that all citizens could participate in democracy, could vote, could debate laws, etc. The only people that could participate in ancient Athenian democracy were land-owning men, and the reason for this, as Hannah Arendt mentions in on violence text that we looked at last, the reason for this is that in order to participate in democracy, one needed to have the leisure to leave work and go debate politics. And so one had to be a landowner. One had to have slaves working one's land and servants attending to one's affairs in order to go participate in Athenian democracy. So this is an entirely different class of people by the system of Athenian politics. And for them, right, the highest happiness is honor, is being honored by their peers. And this makes sense, right? Having sort of, as you might say, transcended or left behind the private life of labor, you move on to the social life, the political life of discussion and debate. And what is how do you succeed at debate, or what is the consequence of success in debate? It's honor, right? It's being held in high esteem, fame, right? Notoriety, renown. Um, that is the goal, and certainly, right, this is very much still a goal. And I think it's interesting that for Aristotle, this is the political class. The political class in general doesn't know what happiness is. Right? They think it's honor, renown, uh, and obviously, perhaps this is just the nature of politics. It's true today that uh, people that are renowned, uh, that is the ultimate goal of happiness. Now, there is then this higher, last class of people uh, who know that happiness is neither honor nor pleasure, but is instead, as I said in the introduction, about being excellent for its own sake, because the purpose of life is to be excellent. Uh, Now, why is it not pleasure? Why is happiness not pleasure? Uh, the first answer would be something like, well, perhaps pleasure is a lower kind of happiness than the happiness of the kind of excellence that Aristotle has in mind. But the real reason that pleasure is lower is, well, Aristotle has an argument for why pleasure is lower, and that is that pleasure depends on something external. I only get pleasure from some input, from food, from other people, from uh, drugs, alcohol, etc. Uh, you know, whatever gives you physical pleasures is coming from the outside. And because it depends on something external, then uh, pleasure is a bad candidate for happiness because your happiness then is uh, unstable, is not within your control. You're only happy when something else makes you happy. And the and this is why pleasure is a lower kind of happiness. So the higher kind of happiness is going to be something that you're in control of. Right? You make yourself happy. The same reasoning goes into his analysis of honor. Right? Honor depends on other people. Uh, and while it might be somewhat more stable than physical pleasure, honor is just as fickle. Uh, no matter how renowned you are, no matter how famous and uh, well regarded you are, uh, as we've seen over and over and over again in the last 5 years, it's very easy to lose all of that immediately, to lose all of your fame, uh, all of your renown, all of your goodwill, and in fact, then your fame becomes a kind of curse. Uh, so happiness can't come from something external. Happiness has to be based uh, on your own action, come from your own person. And so, for uh, this highest kind of happiness that is pursued by philosophers, not politicians, is the happiness of practical wisdom. Those who know how to act, what kinds of actions produce happiness. Practical wisdom is the key to happiness, the key to flourishing, the key uh, to the good, what is good in itself. And practical wisdom is another important Aristotelian term. It refers, the Greek word is phronesis. And phronesis is the kind of, is knowledge about action. Uh, Phronesis is one of 5 kinds of knowledge that Aristotle recognizes. Uh, these kinds of knowledge are nous, which is intuition, episteme, which is scientific knowledge, techne, which is craft knowledge, sophia, which is philosophical knowledge, and finally phronesis, which is practical wisdom. And this highest kind of happiness is a knowledge about what to do in order to flourish. How to flourish under your own power. And this involves knowledge of particulars. All right, so the reason to separate these 5 kinds of knowledge is to emphasize that the kind of knowledge that is knowledge about the good, about ethics, about excellence, is unlike uh, certain other kinds of knowledge. One of the most important reasons to separate these kinds of knowledge for Aristotle is to acknowledge that there are different kinds of subjects of study, uh, and that every subject admits of a different degree of clarity. Right? This is a comment that he makes, I think, in the beginning of chapter 2 in book 1. We have to recognize that when we're looking into ethics, we can only have so much clarity. It is not scientific. Right? And again, we can hear Arendt in the background. Ethical knowledge is not scientific knowledge. I can have very clear knowledge about mathematical things, about uh, biological things, physical things. Right? I know with certainty that when I drop a rock, it will fall to the ground. I know that clearly. Uh, when it comes to ethical questions about the nature of the good and how to achieve happiness, things are necessarily less clear. And so the knowledge of how to be happy and how to live a good life is going to be for Aristotle a fundamentally different kind of knowledge than the kind of knowledge that you get through epistemic, scientific knowledge. It's also going to be different than the kind of knowledge you get through uh, craft knowledge, through techne or technological reasoning, which is to say, it isn't going to be mechanical. For example, an example of techne, craft knowledge would be, this is a classic example, basket weaving. Right? I know how I have to learn how to weave a basket. Certain baskets are better made than others, and there's some room for improvisation there. But ultimately, once you know how to make a basket, you know how to make a basket. And that's the end of the story, right? You learn how to make a basket once, and that's how you make a basket the rest of your life. Same thing in modern day technology, right? You know how to build a car. You know how to build a car. Right? You are able to build a car. You can always tinker with the design, what have you, but right, the basic design, the basic elements are there. Uh, So ethical knowledge is not going to be like that either. That for like a kind of procedure that you figure out how to do, and then you do it, and you see um, it's- you see this in certain people, right? We can all, I think of there are lots of prominent examples of scientific knowledge being applied to ethical questions, right? Well, in order to know what's right, we have to have all the statistics, we have to have all the data, and then we'll do our best to make a purely logical decision based on that data. Uh, for Aristotle, that is uh, a ridiculous way to do ethics, right? Why? Because the data doesn't tell you uh, what you should do, how you should act. Uh, we'll say more about that in a minute. But we also get examples of people sort of trying to apply craft knowledge to ethics, techne, as though ethics were kind of technology. For example, like a comedy routine where you teach, uh, someone who's never lived in polite society how to go on a date, right? Remember to say please, thank you. Remember to wipe your mouth after eating, that sort of thing, right? The sort of standard uh, protocol for polite behavior. But then it's applied incorrectly, right? Uh, that simply running through this procedure doesn't make one ethical. Right? Uh, when someone's uh, family member dies, right, you can sort of mechanically call and offer a a textbook message of condolences. Um, but the fact that it is obviously, if it is mechanical, if it is clear that you're just running a program and treating ethics like a technology, then it's not ethical, right? That's the key. To recognize that someone is merely running an ethical program on you is to realize that they're not treating you ethically. Uh, and that's one important distinction. Um, so the other forms of knowledge, right? Philosophical wisdom, Sophia, and nous, intuition. Uh, these are going to play some more of a role in phronesis, practical wisdom. But practical wisdom will be distinct from them also. Philosophical wisdom is purely abstract knowledge, right? And so while abstract thinking is going to eventually play an important role in ethics, uh, we have to make a fundamental distinction between phronesis and Sophia, practical wisdom, and philosophical wisdom, because practical wisdom is about action in the real world, right? About the physical world, whereas philosophical wisdom is entirely abstract. Similarly, uh, nous, intuition, is going to be entirely internal knowledge. It comes entirely from within, whereas phronesis is going to be based on judgment about what is external. Um, so, phronesis, knowledge about action, about how to do the right thing, is a distinct kind of knowledge and can't be reduced to scientific, technological, philosophical, or intuitive knowledge. The reason why it is practical wisdom is because it is acquired through practice, right? uh, in the real world. Now, this is a point of profound departure from Plato, right? Uh, in any close reading of Plato and Aristotle, you'll see many more similarities than you'll get in the traditional story. But in the traditional story, uh, this sets up an opposition between Plato and Aristotle, which is the practical theoretical divide. Right? Remember, Plato believes in this abstract universal good, uh, the form of the good, which is theoretical, the good in theory. And Aristotle is interested in uh, the practical good, right? The good in practice, what will actually produce good results. Uh, so the theory practice divide, right? You hear this all the time. It's great in theory, but will it work in practice? Right? Good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. This is the problem with theoretical ethics, is that if they don't work in practice, then they aren't ethical, right? Then they aren't actually true. So the only way to be sure of the good is to put it into practice and see if it works. So for Aristotle, um, you have to begin with practice, and knowledge about the good is only developed through practice. We should think about practice here, um, in the way that a lawyer practices, where you practice law, or the way you practice medicine, uh, or for that matter, the way you practice a sport. Uh, but let's take medicine as an example. Um, Ethical knowledge is a practice, uh, and that means that, like the medical practice, it is based on the particularity of a situation, the particularity of the case that it's under examination, the particularity of circumstances. Um, so, a patient comes in, right, complaining of a headache, right? And let's say, or let's say the patient comes in, yeah, fine, complaining of a headache. Uh, the doctor might take one look and, you know, based on scientific theory or based on theory, say, well, the most likely cause of this headache is uh, dehydration and exhaustion, right? So drink 2 large glasses of water and go to sleep. Um, One could hear the patient's uh, explanation of symptoms and simply apply what is statistically or theoretically the most likely cause of the headache and prescribe uh, a, uh, a treatment based on that. But a good doctor is one who doesn't treat the symptom as a symptom of uh, a symptom in theory, but a symptom in practice, right? In the particular patient that is in front of them, right? And so they'll ask, uh, a set of relevant questions, uh, and they'll look at the patient's medical history, and right, think of all the different impacts on that person, and it might turn out that the headache has a different cause, right? Only by paying close attention to the specific situation at hand can one be sure of one's judgment about a situation. And to base it in theory, to skim over the particularity of the situation at hand, is not going to do any good. Now, okay, that my example is a terrible one, right? A headache is not a good example. We can think of this, um, also in the legal profession. Well, sorry, let me not mix my metaphors. Let's stick to doctors. What makes a good doctor? Not having theoretical knowledge, right? Uh, a student who has just graduated from medical school probably has a better command uh, of medicine as a discipline, as a study, the concepts and theory of medicine. Uh, Probably has a better command of that than a doctor who's been practicing for 30 years. But who's the better doctor? Obviously, it's the doctor who's been practicing for 30 years. And the reason is that the excellence of the doctor comes not from theoretical knowledge, but from the accumulation of experience. Excellence is based in accumulation of experience. And one learns what to do in a situation, learns how to judge a situation and thus how to act in a situation through the accumulation of experience. Uh, Now, what is it then that one learns through the accumulation of experience if not something theoretical, if not uh, an idea that could just be transmitted, right, transferred to someone else. uh, and the answer is judgment. What you learn is judgment. You can't learn judgment from a book. Uh, but this is. I'm trying to motivate this, but I mean, this is an amazing thing, right? That judgment is developed. One can certainly develop good judgment, but one cannot say how to develop good judgment, except to say, keep practicing, right? There is this almost magic that happens through practice, through seeing, uh, through letting particular situations accumulate, through developing experience. Uh, and it's that judgment that Aristotle's interested in. Right? So, what is it that one judges once one has judgment? What does ethical thinking think about, if not ethical theory or abstract ideas? Uh, Ethical thinking is about evaluating particular situations. Uh, it's about evaluating the particular, the circumstances in which one finds oneself. So, this is the kind of magic of experience. The example that Aristotle gives is a ship's captain, someone who has sailed, been captained ships for decades, who's has lots of experience sailing, and he says only an experienced captain can be trusted to get through a storm, uh, even though no captain will have seen the storm that is coming. Uh, so here's the trick about particularities. This ship captain has seen 1,000 storms, but with each new storm, the captain can't be sure what will be required of him. The captain can't be sure uh, what kind of action is going to be best. He'll have to decide based on the storm as it's happening. Right? There's no way to prepare for it. It can't be predicted, and therefore it can't be scientific. Uh, it responds to the particularity of the physical world. Right? So, another way to think about it would be, um, forgive the sort of, well, let's do two more. Would be like in sports, right? A quarterback, for example. You have a play, you have a basic plan, but every snap is different, and every time the defense comes at you differently. The wind is blowing a different way. The wind is blowing a different strength. It's raining. It's snowing. It's sunny. It's cloudy. It's cold. It's hot. You have a sore back, a twisted knee, whatever it might be. You have to, in that snap moment, uh, respond to the situation. See the particular moment, take into consideration all of the factors, and make a judgment about what the successful move will be. Right? Uh, Another example would be in right cooking. Uh, you are, you know, baking a cake from scratch. Uh, you can follow a recipe perfectly. Uh, yeah, actually, baking is a bad example. All right, sorry. We'll leave off with the examples for that. Hasn't been my day. Uh, so, one responds to the particularity of the situation. And the particularity of the situation is, or this fact, that the good is based on the particular, is key to Aristotle's fundamental disagreement with Plato about the nature of the good in general. Uh, because for Aristotle, the good is always connected to some end, right? Some goal. Everyone, as we saw in the first line of book one, everyone uh, pursues the good. Every art and every inquiry, every action pursues the good. Uh, but all actions have different ends. Right? So it's strange that there would be uh, that, you know, what is good in playing guitar is also good in shoveling the sidewalk. What is good in making love is good in war, right? How can it be that in all of these actions, the good is what's aimed at? Right? Uh, the good is too abstract, right? Uh, Rather, Aristotle thinks, the good is defined by the action itself. The good is relative to the action or the discipline. So it's not that there is one good, the form of the good that uh, that informs both playing guitar and shoveling the sidewalk. Uh, Instead, right, the good of what is required to be a good guitarist, what is required to be a good shoveler, are fundamentally different, right, relative to the particular task at hand. And becoming a good guitarist doesn't make one a good shoveler, etc. Uh, so the good is always relative to the project at hand. Um, the good is defined by the end or the goal. Similarly, right, what makes uh, a dog a good dog is not what makes a human a good human, or uh, a doctor a good doctor, a horse breeder a good horse breeder. Uh, so, in asking about the good that is the end of all action, that is happiness, we're asking about uh, what is good based on the purpose of being human. All right, I got ahead of myself there. Forgive me, but um, so the good is based in the particular task at hand, and not anything theoretical. So this is this whole discussion about Plato's theory of forms, right? That the abstract form of the good doesn't help me uh, be a better guitar player. If I know the abstract form of the good, uh, I'm not going to be better at any particular task. And the only thing that makes sense, the only thing that matters, is being good at a particular task. Uh, I'm not going to get into the details of Aristotle's argument against the forms, um, but except to say, right, that because Aristotle rejects this idea of an abstract idea of the good, he embraces uh, an immanent theory of truth and goodness. Uh, all right, we're going to do it. So for Plato, the idea is that there is a form of the good, and the form is the cause of all good things. The good is a transcendental truth. It is a form or an idea. And for Plato, in Plato's metaphysics, the forms are the foundation of reality, as I mentioned in the introduction. So when we look at a table, for example, right, what is it that makes the table a table? Is it any of the particular physical characteristics? Right, I'm looking at a table right now, or sorry, let's look at this. Well, we'll use the example of a table. It's always been a go-to example. We look at a table. What makes it a table a table? I'm looking at a brown, square, four-legged table made of wood. What in any of those attributes makes the table a table? I could change any of those attributes and it would still be a table. I could be looking at a white, three-legged metal table. All of the attributes are different. I could look at it from the side and it would appear flat and have a lot of space between it and the ground. I could look at it from above and it would appear square, and I wouldn't see anything below it. Right? I could look at it from all different angles and it would have different appearances. It would appear triangular or square or a straight line or a rectangle. Right? So what is it that gives it its being, its tableness? I could destroy. Let me pause. Right? For Plato, what makes the table a table and what allows you to see that both the brown four-legged wooden table and the white metal three-legged table are both equally tables is the fact that the tableness of each table rests not in the physical being of either table, but instead in the idea of tableness, which underlies those physical beings. The idea of a table is more real than any physical table, and the idea of a table is the cause of all physical tables. I could destroy this physical table, and it would have no effect on the idea of a table. I could theoretically destroy all tables in existence, and it would still have no effect on the idea of a table. So for Plato, the physical world is not real. Only ideas are real. And ideas are eternal and unchanging. The idea of a table is the same, regardless of its particular physical manifestation. The idea of a table remains the same, no matter how many tables are destroyed. So the idea is eternal. And the particular being is unreal and unimportant. So for Aristotle, then, to say that the good is not a transcendental and eternal and unchanging idea, but instead is particular to specific cases and changes depending on the circumstances and depending on the particularity, is an enormous departure from Plato. And it sets up another fundamental philosophical distinction, just like the theoretical practical one, between a philosophy of transcendence, which is Plato's philosophy of the forms, and a philosophy of immanence, which is Aristotle's philosophy of practical wisdom. I'm schematizing here. These ideas are much larger than just the context of Aristotle's ethics, but they're certainly reflected there. So this whole debate with Plato in Book One is important for justifying the idea that the good is based on particular situations, that the good is learned only through practice, only through action, only through behavior. Now, what is the nature then of practical wisdom? Based on particularity, developed through practice, and about developing excellence of character, right? To become an excellent human being. Now, the good is always defined by the action, by the particular end. And so when we want to know what makes a person happy, we want to know what practical wisdom ends at. What we're asking is, what is good for the human being? And in order to know this, we have to know what the purpose of a human being is. What is the purpose of life? What is the goal of life? All right. So, what is the purpose of life? To flourish. But how then does the kind of being that we are flourish? Now we have to know what we are. What is the human being, and what would flourishing look like for the human being? What Aristotle means by flourishing, what he means by happiness, is the coming to completion of oneself, one's being. That happiness comes when one has self-actualized, when one has acted in such a way that all of one's potential has been realized, made real. brought into the real world through action. So, what is the general self actualization of the human being? For Aristotle, the human being is the uh, zoon logon eshon, or as it's translated into Latin, the animal rationale, or the animal, the rational animal. This this is the most traditional definition of the human being in philosophy. Human being is a rational animal. What does this mean? It means that in order to flourish, the human being must engage their rational faculty, must engage their minds. In order to be happy, one has to intellectually flourish, not in the sense of necessarily, uh, pursuing philosophy for 20 years or, um, being an intellectual, but must uh, be engaged in contemplation. And this is the third and highest form of life that Aristotle mentioned back when he was dividing up the kinds of life, right? The vulgar life, the political life, and the contemplative life. So the fullest flourishing of the human being is found in contemplation, in thinking, in reflecting. Happiness comes through contemplation. But didn't we say that happiness is about action, not abstract? That uh, ethics is not about theory. And so, how can contemplation be the greatest happiness if action is the means of achieving it? We'll take this question up in a number of ways. But for starters, I want to say a little bit more, just at the end here, about the rational animal and what Aristotle means by this. The rational animal is not, again, the greatest translation of the zoon logon eshon, because uh, the crucial word there is logos, zoon logon. And the logos, though it is the basis of our word logic and is often translated rationality, um, is a much richer word than just rationality or logic. Logos generally means right speech, true account. Uh, it is specifically connected to speech. Uh, so to say that zoon logon eshon means rational animal misses a crucial aspect. One could also say the human is the animal with language. The human is the animal that converses, right? Uh, the animal that not just speaks, right? Because birds speak and dogs speak and lots of animals speak, but can speak about the truth. It can dialogue about the truth. So the essential definition of the human being is animal that talks about the truth. And so if that is the end goal of ethics, to be engaged in contemplation about, but then also necessarily uh, dialogue and, again, political discussion about the truth, uh, then slightly different. Um, all right, so that was a little bit more haphazard walkthrough of Aristotle than I intended. My apologies. Um, and we will pick up with book two next time.